Approximately the first 11.5 minutes of the following video was reenacted due to some technical difficulties in the original recording. The Jewish Studies Center website now has a link to Susan's downloadable cookbook. It also has pictures of the bread products that Susan finished baking after the end of the workshop, as well as pictures of baked items sent in by workshop participants. Hello, everyone. I'm Jerry Garfinkel, Treasurer of the Jewish Studies Center. I'm here to welcome everyone to our first international Zoom session, Zoom class, Challah workshop, which is coming to you from Jerusalem, Israel. We have today people from 9 different states, as well as the UK and Israel. Our Zoom sessions are completely free, but we do have expenses, so donations are very welcome, and you can donate if you wish on our website, www.jewishstudiescenter.org. Now I have the pleasure to introduce Susan Finston, who is the presenter for today. Susan is a longtime Jewish Studies Center teacher and an expert challah baker. She's baked challah all over the world in the course of a very adventurous career. She originally is from Ann Arbor, Michigan, but she has been a U.S. Foreign Service officer, a lawyer, a consultant to the pharmaceutical industry, an advisor to NGOs and tech companies, and currently is the president of Finston Consulting, her own company. She is right now based in Old Katamon in Jerusalem, and she's baked and brought her challah to so many different destinations, including India, China, Bhutan, and Manila in the Philippines. And at one time, when she was still in the country, she had to bring partially baked challah cross-country to Ann Arbor for a bas mitzvah. She's also the author of a book called Dining in the Garden of Eden, which is an international vegetarian cookbook, and it's available for download. And she's also currently working on 2 other cookbooks, maybe 3 of them. So given her foreign service background, her cooking experience, her teaching and writing about cooking, I personally view her as a Jewish child. So Susan, take it away, please.
Thank you, Jerry, for that lovely introduction. After teaching the Challah workshop course for the Jewish Studies Centers for many years, in October of 2018, my family made Aliyah to Israel, and I thought that that would be my last opportunity to teach Challah baking with the Jewish Studies Center, so I really appreciate this opportunity. We've never done it this way before. This is due to COVID that we are meeting by Zoom instead of in person, but it's a great opportunity for connecting and communicating at a difficult time. And I hope that it will be a good experiment, and we'll see how it goes if we ever do it again, but we're doing it this time. The course will have 3 parts, as mentioned in the description of the Challah workshop. The first is to work the recipe, to both mix challah from the beginning and also to work with a pre-made batch of challah dough for shaping at the end. And in between, we'll talk about the importance of challah traditionally for Shabbat and for Jewish observance at home, and also halachically. It is one of only 3 positive commandments for women, and it's very important, not because it is one of the 3 out of 613, but it's there because it's so important, and it's so central to a lot of Jewish home practice. So you have, before we came online, you received both the recipe and the instructions on the equipment that you need, and also the handout on halacha and the wonder of challah. If you are baking along, which is great, or if you're just here to learn, which is also wonderful, I hope that you have both of those for reference. And if you are baking along, it's very helpful, as I have done, to prepare your ingredients ahead of time to make sure that you don't have any surprises and that you have everything that you need to get started. So without any further ado, I would like to get started. And first thing we will do is we will add 1.5 cups of water to the KitchenAid. For many years, I just used a bowl and a wooden spoon. When we teach the course in person, of course, we don't use this kind of mechanical equipment. So it's perfectly fine if you're doing it at home with a bowl and a wooden spoon. I do have this lovely new Israeli-bought KitchenAid, so I'm going to use it. And it does make things a bit easier. So I have the 2 scant tablespoons of yeast to add to the water. To help it activate, I'm going to use approximately a tablespoon of the sugar and reserve the rest for a moment or so when we'll put the rest in. But first we're going to mix in a tablespoon of the sugar with the yeast and the water. And in just a minute, the yeast will be activated. It's always worth starting with fresh yeast. It's already activating and it's forming bubbles and you can see the activity in it. And I don't know if I move this, if you're able to see it. Let's see if you see it. I think it's hard to see in this light because it's daytime for you, but it's not daytime for me. So let's keep going. Okay. So now I'm going to add the rest of the sugar. And I'm going to start adding the eggs one at a time. One interesting thing here in Israel is that eggs are already kosher. You don't have to use an egg cup. But because we are doing it for a primarily US audience, I have my Pyrex bowl, and I'm going to break each egg into the bowl and do them one at a time so that if there is a problem with an egg, then we'll see it right away and you won't end up having any serious difficulties. That's what I recommend. If you do all the eggs at once and you mix them together and then pour them in and you miss something about an egg, then you have a bigger problem than if you just do them one at a time. Okay, so I've added the eggs. The next ingredient that I have to add is the oil. I like to use sunflower oil, but you can use other kinds of vegetable oil. And you'll see here, this is a little trick that I like to use. The honey is added to the measuring cup after the oil is already in it. So it's 1/2 cup of oil and 1/4 cup of honey. And I think I see people nodding. If you have worked with honey, you know it's always better to get honey out of a cup that's been oiled. And the best way to oil the cup is to put the oil from the recipe in first, and then the honey, which will slide to the bottom. But when you pour it, I think you can probably see it's all coming out without a problem. You don't end up with the stickiness at the bottom. It all comes out really easily, so much more easily than if you didn't have the oil already in the cup. So that's the reason why those things were pre-mixed together. I can add the 2 teaspoons of salt while that's mixing.
Susan, there's a question from one of the members of the group
Yes.
that the person's yeast didn't bubble and it's lumpy and not activated.
If the yeast isn't activated, you should start over. It's very good to make sure that you're getting little bubbles and some sign of change. It might not look exactly the way I described it, but if it doesn't look any different, it's not going to get better. If you've waited 5 minutes and it hasn't activated, then you may need to test your yeast separately. I use room temperature water, But if your yeast is iffy, you can, in a separate bowl, you can add a tablespoon of yeast. You can add a half a cup or a quarter cup of warm water. The water shouldn't be more than, say, 100 degrees, like a bath for a baby, because you don't want to kill the yeast. And add half a tablespoon of sugar. Really don't go forward if you're not getting any activity out of the yeast, because that means that your bread isn't going to rise. And
so do 20 teeny bubbles count, and with lumps?
Yes, the lumps aren't a problem. As long as you're getting bubbles, you're in good shape.
Okay, even teeny ones.
Though the bubbles will be teeny.
Okay.
It's a microorganism. It's not going to look like boiling water.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so she's okay. But that's a very good question, because if the yeast has been sitting around for a couple of years, you know, you're going to get a bad result if your ingredients aren't so good. So it's good to ask that question. Okay, so we are already up to the point of adding flour. Now, I don't know if anyone noticed, the recipe calls for 4 eggs. I put in 3 eggs, and that's because there's something different in Israel, and I've heard about this from friends and colleagues also. I have one friend who really prefers only to bake with American King Arthur flour. That's, of course, much more complicated now that people aren't traveling, and getting things from the US is you know, taking longer, more expensive, etc. So I'm using good old Shufersal bread flour, but what I've, because the moisture content of the flour, or something about the water here, or the eggs are bigger for some reason, it does come out differently. And my adjustment is that I tend to use a little more flour here, and I tend to use 1 less egg here, and then it comes out fine. But it's interesting because it's like a science experiment, and there are so many variables that it's very difficult to know what exactly is making the difference. And I found over time, we're here 2 years in October, that the safest thing for me to do was omit 1 egg. The rest of the recipe can stay the same. And if I have to, I add a little more flour. So now we're adding the flour. If I were really Julia Child, I'd have that camera above, right? But I don't have the camera above. Trying not to add too much at once. And then I'm running the mixer until the flour is mostly absorbed in the batter. I don't know if I turn it, if you'll be able to see it. I think you can see it. It's looking a little bit shaggy, but it's still very wet. So when it's wet, you don't want to put in the dough hook yet. You want to get it a little shaggier and a little bit less liquid. Now we're almost to the point of adding the dough hook.
When you have Susan, when you have a moment, would you talk about the different types of flour and what you recommend in terms of why do people choose King Arthur? What makes it better? Is there benefit to using bread flour, whole wheat, the various aspects to all of that?
I'm really traditional when it comes to making challah. If I'm in an urgent situation, and what's a challah emergency? I guess a challah emergency is if you don't have any bread flour or white flour, then you can use other things. There's nothing in Tanakh that says that it has to be a certain kind of flour, so it's partly a question of taste. Bread flour has a higher gluten content, so it's good for bread. I think that means that it has more protein. It's good for bread. It helps you to get crumb in bread and a high rising bread. So when I started, I would always just use all-purpose flour, and people found it, you know, perfectly acceptable for a long time. I was single. I didn't have such a big kitchen. I didn't have the capacity to have all different kinds of flours, and I would have rye and I would have whole wheat, and I would have plain flour. And then over time, when I could expand my repertoire and my storage, I did move to using bread flour, and it does get you a better, lighter, higher, more fine crumb. So I would recommend, if you can, either a mixture of bread flour and all-purpose or bread flour. Some people really like having whole wheat or other flours mixed in. I don't usually do that, but a couple of years ago at Tifereth Israel, the winning challah in the challah tasting contest, I believe, was probably an all whole wheat flour challah. So some people really like that. I'm going to move now to the dough hook, and before I do that, I'm going to hold it over so you can see. It's still not, I would say, not finished, but it's not as wet, and it's shaggier looking, and it looks less like batter and more like dough. So that's when you can move to the dough hook. Trying to get this back in. There we go. And now, if I have to add more flour, it will be all-purpose, because between making the demonstration dough that's rising and this, I've used a lot of bread flour today. So I don't know that I have any more. I've got plenty of flour, though, so that's not a problem. Okay. When you have the dough hook in, it starts to rise up like that. All you have to do is let gravity do the work, put a little more flour in, use your spatula to scrape around the sides, and then in just a minute or two, you'll be ready to turn the mixer on again.
You just added more flour to clean the beater. Is that additional flour or part of the 6 to 7 cups?
I'm still using the 6 to 7 cups. I haven't used any more flour than that. This is what I measured out ahead of time. About 7 cups. It looks like it's going to be about the right amount of flour. You don't get a prize for using more or less flour. It doesn't matter, but it looks like I'm going to have enough. I'm going to let it fall down one more time. It's just a practical trick that if you put a little bit of flour on the dough hook, it becomes much easier to get the dough off of it. It's starting to feel good. The one disadvantage of the Zoom call is that in the classroom, I go around and I help people at this stage to get the texture right.
Susan, can we do this by hand if we don't have a KitchenAid?
I did it by hand for years. I didn't have a KitchenAid till after I got married. I did it by hand for years. I used a wooden spoon. And when we do it in class, we use a wooden spoon because we're not going to have everybody having a KitchenAid. And I don't do it differently from anyone else in the class. So plenty of times when I'm on retreats or when we've been at camp or whatever, we just do it by hand. This is just... Okay. So I am going to have to add the last of this and probably a little more flour. See how it's going. Gonna make some room here now. Okay. Something about being in Jerusalem, the dough is always wetter. I'm gonna have to get out a little more flour. It's okay. Okay.
Susan, how do you know if it's too wet or too dry, etc.?
I'm gonna get it out on the counter. And it's out. All right, so this is probably about as much flour as I'm gonna add now. Can you see that it looks smooth when you put the heel of your hand in it? I think I have to move this so that you can see it better. Can you see it now?
Yeah.
So you should be able, this is the kneading motion. It's gonna need a little more flour, but this is the kneading motion. You're basically using both hands and the heel of your hand. Gonna get the dough off of here now. What's going on? There we go. Can I get the dough off of the dough hook, and then I'll put the dough hook aside because we're done with the dough hook now. We'll take a little more of the flour that was in there. So if it's sticky and it's sticking to your fingers and you can't turn it easily, then that means that you need more flour. It shouldn't be crumbly or dry, and it's much better when you're starting. It is much better to have it be too wet. You can always add a little more flour later. It should be as wet as it can be without actually being physically sticky, and that's what I'm going for here. And when you pull it, do you see how when I pull it, it's not tearing and it's not looking rough, it's looking like, and it feels moist to the touch, but not at all. So it's not so sticky that I can't handle it, although it's at the margin, actually. And that's okay, because now it's gonna go for its first rise. So you wanna end up with something that looks roughly like this, okay? And even with a KitchenAid, even with all the appliances in the world, you have to touch it, you have to know what it feels like. And look, it's too sticky, see? Look at that, it's still too sticky. So I'm gonna put a little more flour. Sorry, I dropped it in there and I shouldn't have. Because when it's so sticky that when you take your hand off of it, it comes up like that and it's sticking to your hand. As much as you want it to be as moist as you can handle it, that's a little too moist. So this is the kneading motion. You see I'm pushing it with the heel of the hand. And now I'm going to get out my bread bowl and get, yes?
What is the surface you're kneading the bread on right now? And do you have any suggestions around those surfaces?
This is a clean kitchen counter. When I make sourdough pizza dough, I use parchment paper or wax paper. If I do a pie crust, I do that. But when I'm doing challah, I think I'll put a little more flour in. When I'm doing challah, I just use a really clean counter. I think there were places that we moved around at the Jewish Study Center, and I think there were places that we had no idea if we were in a beautiful kitchen on the hill. Was it called Hill House? That was lovely, and I think that they had marble counters, but most of the time we were in varied places, and sometimes we would put foil down or we would put paper down because we weren't comfortable that it could be clean enough. But if you're in your own kitchen, God willing, you could clean the counters enough that you feel comfortable. And I just do it straight on the counter like that. So I'm going to get my bread bowl, which I've had since before I got married. I'm going to get a little more safflower oil. And I'll show you how you get it ready to rise. So this is a bread bowl. What you want to do is put a little bit of oil in the bowl. Just a little bit. It's not even really a teaspoon of oil. It's just a little bit of oil so that you can move the bread in all directions, and it'll be a little bit less sticky later when you take it out. And you can cover it either with saran wrap or you can cover it with a damp towel. And one thing that we used to always do at the study center is people would take their dough home, because it would be in the evening, as Jerry said, it would usually be at like 7 o'clock at night, and they would just put it in the fridge. So later after class, I'll just put this in the fridge and then I won't worry about it till the morning. Now, before we move to the dough that's already been rising for several hours, I'll grab my chair again and we can talk a little bit about why challah. Why is it important? Why is it so important that it's one of 3 positive commandments for women in all of Judaism? If I have to say one reason and one reason only why challah is so important, it's because Judaism is a home-based faith, a home-based religion. And it's the things that we do at home that contribute the most, I believe, to our Jewish identity and our continuity as a people. Challah is a very important part of home-based Judaism. Every Friday night, we reenact scenes from the Jewish temple. We make our own ritual sacrifices, our own small korban, our own altar, and we are basically dedicating to God, to Hashem, challah, wine, light. These are elements. In other religions, it's called a puja. And if I have Hindu or Muslim or Buddhist friends, especially the Hindus or the Buddhists, they understand this, and they say, what are you doing Friday night? I say, we're doing a puja. Do you want to come over? We're making our ritual sacrifices. We are dedicating ourselves, and then we are entering into Shabbat. Challah is a very important part of Shabbat. Shabbat is what keeps Jews. It's not Jews that keep Shabbat, but Shabbat that keeps Jews. And challah, it's not impossible to have Shabbat without challah, but I think it's a lot more challenging. I'll tell one more story from my own life, and then we'll move into Tanakh. After my daughter's bat mitzvah, she came up to me and she had a head of steam and she said, I have something to talk to you about. It's very important. I said, what is it, Rachel? And she said, well, you know, Dad married you. He knew what you were about. Aaron, he likes to go to the synagogue. He likes all this stuff. That's good for him. But nobody asked me. Nobody asked me if I wanted to go to shul on Shabbat. Nobody asked me if I wanted to do all this stuff. And, you know, I've had my bat mitzvah. I'm 13 now. And I looked at her and I said, oh, Rachel, I'm so glad you're bringing this up. Do you know how hard we work every week? I make the challah. Yona, who was our housekeeper, she makes sure everything is clean. We all take showers.
Oh, wow.
So if you aren't interested, what a relief. If we don't have, is everything okay? Okay, so I said, if you don't want me to make the challah anymore, so much work we do. And then she said, well, I didn't say I wasn't interested. I just said, nobody asked me. And that was the last conversation we ever had to have like that. Basically, I think of challah as a gateway drug to Judaism, okay? It's a way that you get people in touch at the most primal level with some very, very important stuff. And it is a core element of our feeling on Friday night of having a taste of the world to come. If your challah is good, it's a wonderful, my husband says you want people to feel positively about all the things that we do. And challah is a wonderful, positive commandment. So I hope everybody had a chance to get the handout in front of them, not necessarily to look at it ahead of time. We don't have to go into great detail. It's already 8:40 and I don't want to go overtime. So I just want to point to a couple of the core elements that connect us to the importance of challah. One of them is Shavuos. Challah is mentioned at Shavuot, and it's the only time when we are commanded to make a ritual sacrifice that isn't unleavened bread. Remember, at Pesach, we're making ourselves holy by removing the leavening. And then at Shavuos, when we're coming back from the spiritual high of the purification of Pesach, and then we count the Omer, at Shavuos, there's a wave offering that's required with 2 loaves, 2 leavened loaves. And that is the only mention in Tanakh of a sacrifice of 2 leavened loaves following Pesach and the counting of the Omer. Double portion is also very significant because of the experience of Jews in the wilderness after Yetziat Mitzrayim, after the freeing of the slaves from Egypt. We know in Shemot there was always a double portion of manna, and that is where we get the double portion of challah specifically for Shabbat. I mentioned at the outset, and I am sorry that we're going to do this very lightly over because I want to make sure that we have time for the braiding and the rolling, which is deceptively simple. It seems like it's going to be hard. It's really a lot of fun. Sometimes in courses I teach shapes for the season, special shapes for high holidays, special shapes for other Shabbatot, but today we'll do the traditional 6 braids, and I want to make sure we get to that. We can't skip over, though, the importance of taking challah, which is also obligatory for men if women aren't there to do it, but it's one of the 3 positive commandments for men. And this is a commandment that originally was for when you entered the land. So if you go to page 2 of the handout, if you have it, it says, Daver el b'nei Yisrael ve'amarta aleihem, speak to the children of Israel and tell them, when you enter the land to which I'm bringing you, when you are eating of the bread of the land, you set aside a gift. That is the taking of the challah. It is not only daraita, halachic commandment, not of the rabbis, but it's right there from the discourse when the Jews were getting ready to enter the land. And it's the separation similar to Truma and the other taking of sacrifices from the threshing floor. It's the first portion of dough. And again, that's why I'm doing the whole recipe, because if you do half a recipe, you don't take it from the dough. There's also a very mystical element to challah relating to the showbread that were part of the Mishkan, part of the temple, and it was the idea that these challah loaves actually represent the 12 tribes. And it gets very, very mystical from here on out. But to me, that's also very interesting. So you're baking 12 loaves at the time of the temple. There's a very special rack that they get put in. Every Shabbat, they swap out the old ones for new ones. The old ones go to the Kohanim, but mysteriously and mystically, they never went stale. They always were warm and they always were fresh. And then they were eaten by Aaron and his sons. And that's why I'm saying that's what we're doing on Friday nights. We are the Kohanim. We are eating from the showbread. It's a very, very basic primal element of Judaism dating back to before the time of the temple, not just what was the temple sacrifice, but even predating that. Okay, so there's a lovely Kabbalah description on the last page. I'm not going to take the time to go through it here because I want to make sure that we get to the braiding. However, I would also mention that you can see the connection when you have the 12 tribes and you have the 12 loaves, and we have on Friday night 2 loaves, and we have a 6 braided challah, and we have 2. We again, symbolically, we have the 12 tribes on our small altar. And we are again replicating that very early experience of the Kohanim, and then we are making the sacrifice, dedicating the challah, and then we are, like Aaron and the Kohanim, we are consuming the sacrifice. So it's much more than, oh, it's Erev Shabbat and we have challah. There's a lot going on there, of which a lot of the time we don't even have to be aware, but it's still going on and we're doing it. And that's what I mean by saying it's a central obligation. It's not some kind of fringe benefit. It really helps us to keep the Shabbos, and the Shabbos is what keeps the Jews. So let's move on now to a loaf that is a challah that has been rising, some challah that's been rising. I think you can see something. Let's see if I can make it bigger. There we go. I'm going to turn this a little bit so you can see more of the challah. Now you can see the difference. Do you see how this one is soft and pliable? It's not tearing. It's not too sticky. I got really lucky with this one because I can tell you that a lot of the time when I take it out from the second rise, and I always do 2, it's better to do 3 than to do 1. It will taste better, it will keep longer, and in general, it will be a better challah if you do that. So you can see it kind of looks like the outside of a big egg, but it's very smooth. And I'm going to get a tool now to cut it. Like so. I'm sorry, somebody was saying something.
Let's see. The question was, what do we actually do with the loaf for God after we leave it on the table?
Well, on Friday night, we have on the ritual table, we have the Kiddush cup that's filled with juice or wine. We have the challah that's covered while we're doing the other brachot. So now I have 6, and I don't weigh them out. Some people weigh them out. Some people are very, very didactic about it. I go by feel, and it always comes out okay. But if you're nervous, you can certainly measure them more and weigh them more, and you basically you want 6 pieces that are approximately the same. So we have the blessings and we have the songs, and we, between the Kiddush and the washing of the hands and the blessing over the challah, we are traditionally silent or humming rather than singing. And then after the blessing, We put salt on it. Again, that is similar to how ritual sacrifices, offerings were salted on the altar. And we are making a small altar. And then after we salt it, we pass it around and we eat it. And then that's how we say that it's a taste of the world to come. This one is a little bit too small. I'm going to do that one again. There's such a thing as too approximate. Is that clear? We're basically having it with our Friday night meal, and then again, on Shabbat, there's a mitzvah of having 3 meals. They don't really count breakfast. Some people don't eat breakfast, and usually breakfast isn't a big deal on Shabbat, although I guess it could be a bigger deal now since we're pretty much staying in on Shabbat and not going anywhere. They did put back the limitations on the number of people who can be in a closed space, including a shul. So, and I have been nervous about not getting sick, so we've pretty much been staying in on Shabbat. Okay, so I think you can see this. I'm going to try to put it a little bit more that way. So you see I have, it's like a fan. I have 6 pieces. Okay, if they are too wet to roll out this way, then you do have to add more flour. Okay, so you're always going to go from the outside to the inside. So we have first that one and that one to the outside. Okay, and then you make a wider space because you're going to go from the outside to the inside. You start with the first one you did. It goes from the outside to the inside, and then again to the outside. So this one went from the outside to the inside, and then from the outside down. So you're only ever braiding from the outside, going in, never inside going out. And then from the top and the bottom again out. Okay, you see? I'm going to do this a couple more times, so don't worry. I hope I'm not going too fast. If you feel like I'm going fast, I'm going to do it again. This gets us 6 of our 12 tribes. I don't know who figured this out, but they were very smart to figure this out. Because we have our own lechem panim, just like they had in the temple, but we get it every week. And we are the Kohanim. Because of the mitzvah of Challah. So, I'm going to hold this up so that you can see it. A little better. You see that? Not so hard. And I have these, no one's paying me, so I can say it. I'm using Amazon Essentials. These are silicone mats. It means that the cleanup is very, very easy. I frequently will put something underneath them to help them not to stick. I like pine nuts. I used to make, when I was first starting out, I used to use some, and I think this is also an Ann Arbor thing. I actually grew up in Greater Detroit, but I was in Ann Arbor for, 6 or 7 years for school. So I guess it's okay that he said I was from Ann Arbor. So we used to use sunflower seeds in Ann Arbor. That was like I guess a crunchy granola thing, because Ann Arbor had all the co-ops and everything. I loved the co-ops. So much fun. Now we have fancy or organic stores, but it's not the same as the co-op. Okay, so again, I'm trying to cut them so they're approximately similar in size. If it gets really sticky, you add flour if you can't roll them out, but so far this dough has been very cooperative. I think it knows that you're all there watching somehow.
So can you approximate how long the braid, each of those your long pieces are?
Okay, so Jerry mentioned that one time, well, actually I did it twice, I carried challah dough halfway across the US from Washington, DC to Detroit, and my parents couldn't believe that they didn't confiscate it because it does look like it could be some form of, something dangerous in this form. I had it all in a shoebox size container, a plastic container, and those were really big braids because it was for a bat mitzvah. It was for my sister's daughter's bat mitzvah. I did that twice for both of her girls. So those were really big ones. If we're just doing it for a regular Friday night and you don't have a lot of people coming, then I'm not making them big. But these are, I can tell you, just a second, I've got this from, it says visitfred.com. It's from Fredericksburg. And it has a nice ruler on it. And so these are about 10 and a half, 11, between 10 and 12 inches. That's good if you don't want them to be really big, but there's no regulation size. These are probably, and they're good for us now because it's a length that you can see what I'm doing and you could do it the same, and it doesn't seem like it would be that hard to hold on to them, to measure, to roll them out and everything. But it's fairly arbitrary. You can have them as short or as long as you want, and you can do different things with them. If anybody wants, I can show you how you make little rolls. It's kind of nice sometimes that you can put a roll in front of someone, and then after you do the brachot, everybody can have their own roll, and you can keep them. So sometimes I'll have a big loaf and a few rolls instead of having two big loaves. And that, if it's going to be just a very small number of people, it's nice to have big loaves and so many loaves, but at the same time, you don't want it to be a waste either. And especially for older people, you're not going to have like 6 pieces of challah. I mean, I've had people over and I'm amazed at how much challah people eat sometimes. But sometimes I worry also, because it's I don't know, it's a taste of heaven. It's not supposed to be the whole heaven, right? So it's a taste. All right, so let's do another one. Sorry, that was a kind of ambiguous answer, but there really isn't an answer to that question.
Do you think you might show us a roll when you're done with
Sure,
this?
I'll do that one. I'll do rolls next.
Okay. And have you taken the challah yet, or that's still to come?
I haven't yet.
Okay.
I can do that next too.
Okay.
And depending how much flour you use, I'm thinking about it now. I think with the amount of flour I used for this, because I made challah Friday.
Can you make it a little slower, Susan? I think it would help people.
I'll do one more. I've got a lot of dough. I'll do one more and then we'll make rolls.
Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry I went too fast. My hands just started on their own because they know what they're doing better than I do. I don't think about it. Probably if I thought about it, I'd be in trouble. Okay. And you know what? If I don't like the way this end looks, I'm just going to cut it off. And then you pinch both ends. And you can see how it looks. So I'll do one more very slowly, and then the rest we will do rolls. So the way that I've been coming to 6 here, that's worked out fairly well, is to divide it in 2 and then divide the 2 into 3. And if it's not quite even, you can adjust it. These are very useful for making bread. I've had that one for a long time. I think one of the reasons why the bread is nice and elastic like this is because I did give it 2 long risings in the refrigerator while I was preparing. What's that?
Oh,
I'm going to do this one very slowly.
Susan, just a quick question. On the directions, it says to let it rise in a warm place, and you're saying to have it rise in a refrigerator. Which
Oh,
one?
because I had a lot of time. If you're dealing with making it in one day, okay, let's say that it's the fall and Shabbat's coming in between 4 and 4:30, then if you're doing, I like to start in the fall the night before. So on Thursday night, I put it in the refrigerator. But if I'm unable to do that, and some of the time I'm unable to do that, then that means Friday morning, I'm going to start relatively early, and then I'm going to heat the oven on a very, very low setting. You can use a toaster oven if your toaster oven's big enough. And then you're going to take advantage of the fact that it will rise faster in a warm place. So it really depends on circumstances. In Jerusalem in the summer, when I did the dough this morning, and I knew that I wanted it to be ready to roll out between 8:30 and 9 tonight, if I had not put it in the refrigerator, it wouldn't be so good.
is it possible to skip a rising and let only finished braided challah rise? Or do you definitely need 2 rises?
It's better with 2 rises. There are certainly occasions when it's not possible. And then you want to make sure that the proofing, which is the rising after you braid it, we haven't really talked about that part yet. And it's already 9 o'clock, so we'll probably talk about it rather than do it. And it's in the recipe. The proofing then becomes more important if you don't have a second rise. Because have you ever seen challah that looks cracked?
I'll call you back in about.
So if you've ever seen challah that's cracked on top around where it's braided, that means that it didn't proof long enough. It can overproof also, and that's when it looks a little bit puffy and a little bit blurry, but that will still taste better than if it's not proofed enough. So especially if you're not able to do the full second rising, make sure that you have a full proofing. Okay. So I took this one from the top and I moved it to the outside. I took this one from the bottom and I moved it to the outside. Then I'm going to create a big alley in the middle. Okay, so this was the first one, so it will go to the middle. Then the next one will come down. And then you make the alley again in the middle because you're always going to the middle. And then that one. So now we have 2 and 2 again. And we make sure there's a big space in the middle. Having 3 here is the clue. So you have this one now that's got to become the odd one. Now you have 2 again, and you have a nice space in the middle, going to the center. The third one is the one that will go up. Okay? The third one is the one that will come down. And then this one will go to the center. This third one will go down. And now we have 2 and 2 again. This one will go to the center. You've got 3. So as long as you keep this space in the center, it's intuitively much easier to keep straight when you have 6 braids what you're doing next. See, so you just stop, okay, there's the 3rd one. It will come down. This one goes to the center. Now here's the 3rd one, and it will go up. So there we go. And when you get to the end and the pieces aren't so even, when it gets too hard, then you can cut it off. I could have, gone a little bit longer with that. Where'd my cutter go? Oh, here it is. Snuck away. So again, sometimes I fold them under, but just to make it easy to show you what we're going for. Here. You can see it, see? And here you have the other 6 tribes. Okay. So this dough is not enough to say the bracha, but to take the challah, you take off a ping pong sized amount. In the one that I made just in front of you, that's enough dough. I'll say the bracha for that one. And you wrap it up. You can wrap it in saran. Do that. You can use wax paper. You can use a napkin. You can use foil. And this one I would throw away because it's got the saran. Normally I use foil, but this one I also didn't say the bracha, so it's not really the full sacrifice. It wasn't enough flour. But you would put it in foil, you put it at the bottom of the oven, and when you are baking the challah, then that is literally the ritual sacrifice. That's the taking of the challah, and it burns. It gets a little black, and you throw it away at the end. So that is what it means to take challah, and that is the part of the ritual sacrifice. Okay, so let's do some rolls. They can be a little bit smaller than the size of the pieces that we were using for the loaves. So you just want it to look something like this. Super easy. See what I'm doing? Attaching it at the bottom. It's going to be a lovely roll. Could be a little bigger than that. But they're going to double in size. There's another one. You can also use this dough as a base for cinnamon rolls. In that case, you can roll it out as a rectangle. There's another one. And I actually have a recipe that I love now. I started fooling around with Ceylon, which is date paste. That's what we think of as the original honey, and tahini and cinnamon. So here we have the chalot, we have some rolls, and probably some left that I can, I could make one more. I'll make one more challah. You have to be careful though. These are a little close. They're not probably too close, but it's better when you're just starting to probably use 2 trays rather than put them all. I'll probably divide those again. So let's do one more. Well, this one's going to be a little bit smaller probably because I made the rolls. If people like the class, maybe we could do one before high holidays to do high holiday shapes. We've done that in person in Washington. And that's fun. So these are smaller. This is going to be a smaller loaf. I'll go slowly again so you can see the braiding of it. And I realize also that we're close to the end of the time, and I appreciate everyone's patience as I finish the holiday. Oops. I'm sorry, were you saying something, Doris?
Do you ever number the strands? One person suggested numbering them right to left. 1, 5, 6, 2.
How would that work?
I'm not quite sure. That person may want to unmute themselves.
I don't really understand, but you, I suppose you could, but it's not static because they move in and out of place. So I don't know.
But they always go back to a position. So if you think of the places where they are as numbers, if you watch Susan, that's number 6, 2, 1, 5.
If it helps you, then you should do it. As I've said, my fingers know how. I don't know how. My fingers know how. So if I were to stop and do that, I probably would mess it up. You can push it together a little bit if you want the braids to look a little more compact. This is a very small one. It's kind of cute. So, okay. So, here we go. We have little rolls. We have challahs. To finish them, which we don't have time to do now, I will first spray them with water from a water bottle, like any spray bottle, to keep them moist. I will let them rise for a little while, and then before baking them, so you let them rise 30, 45 minutes so that they double in size. That's why I'll move some of these to another tray. And then before baking them, use an egg wash and whatever toppings you want. I have sesame seeds. I've got some white ones and I've got some brown ones. I've got solder, which is nice on top. I've got poppy seeds. Sometimes I've had black sesame seeds. So after you do the egg wash, you sprinkle whatever toppings, and you can do different mixtures, or some you can just do plain, some just with poppy seeds. And then you bake it in a hot oven, and you have got to keep an eye on it because it'll get brown very quickly. And then I hope for people who do it at home, I hope you will send pictures to the Jewish Study Center. We've done that before. People share their final product. Send whatever questions you may have. And I hope most of all that you enjoy it and it adds a spiritual element to your Shabbat, to your observance of Shabbat. Thank you very much. Any quick questions I'm happy to take, but I realize that we're at the end of our time, and I really appreciate the opportunity to continue to talk about challah and teach a little bit, even though I'm not in Washington anymore. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan, very much. There are a number of questions. If you can stay to answer them, and if as other people may be able to stay, that would be great. Are you able to stay for a few more questions?
A couple of minutes.
Yes. Okay, great. So one question is, many bakers will proof the yeast prior to putting it in the recipe. In using dry yeast purchased 4 years ago, stored in the freezer between uses, and the yeast, water, and sugar placed in glass and then rested in a dark place, it should have a head of bubbles like beer poured into a glass, then you know it's alive. Using a meat thermometer to make sure the temperature of the water is at a good temperature for the yeast to come active and not too hot to kill the yeast. Does that sort of jive with the way what makes sense to you?
I use room temperature water. I don't use
Okay.
warm water. I use room temperature. I tend to, usually I discard my yeast before Pesach. So I'm not at all critical of someone who doesn't do that, but I think that Pesach gives us an opportunity to have a big spring clean. And I think that in terms of yeast, because the quality of the yeast is so central to the end product, I would say better safe than sorry, and just pick up a couple of packets of fresh yeast to bake the challah, especially if you're not used to baking it, because then you've got one less thing to worry about.
Right, okay. And the oil you used when you put the challah in the bowl, that was sunflower oil? And does it matter?
Yeah.
What's that?
I use sunflower oil.
Okay, does it matter if it's another kind?
No, you can use soybean oil or safflower, whatever you are comfortable cooking with. I tend to cook with sunflower oil. It's very easy to get here, so I tend to get it.
Okay. Is it okay to let the dough rise in the bowl you used to mix it in?
It's a very good question. I used a different bowl. The bowl should be washed, cleaned, and dried, and then it can be reused. I happen to have a bread bowl, which I've had for 30 plus years, but if you have a mixing bowl and you want to use it, just put the dough down on a clean surface or a piece of wax paper on the counter, and then wash the bowl out, dry the bowl, put your half a teaspoon or teaspoon of oil in it to spread it around, and then you're good to go.
Okay. And in terms of using rapid rise yeast versus regular yeast, any suggestions, thoughts on that?
You know what, I think that's all marketing. I think that like some of it says bread machine, perfect for bread machines. I think that you can use yeast in a bread machine unless there's some really unusual yeast out there. I think any of the packets of yeast that you see in the supermarket, any of those little jars of yeast that you see in the supermarket, you should be able to use them.
Okay, great. So some people also talked about making small loaves, freezing them, and then not having to bake every week, and also during.
I do that, yeah.
Okay.
I tend to make a whole bunch and put it in the freezer, and then we take it out and we warm it up, and it tastes very much.
Okay, and apparently for some people it's been a great part of our trading economy right now during COVID, barter economy.
Absolutely.
So another question, when do you say the blessing for taking the challah? When you separate it from the other dough?
Yes, when you separate it, yes.
Okay. And I guess this is the last question. Can you add more eggs to make a more eggy challah?
I've never had more than 4 eggs, and I think the traditional Litvak recipe, I think, only has 1 egg. So I think 3 or 4 eggs is pretty much at the eggier end of the challah spectrum.
Okay. So someone says that they'd heard not to preheat. That wasn't the last question. Someone heard not to preheat the oven. Is that something you do or don't do with preheating?
I've seen it both ways. I like to use a hotter oven to get a browner crust on the challah, to get it to be a nice deep brown color. Then sometimes I turn down the oven later on if it's a bigger loaf to make sure that it's going to get baked completely and not have it be, you know, very dark outside and not baked enough. I think that if you don't preheat the oven, then the bread will continue to rise in the oven a little bit. And so if you're a little shorter on time, not preheating the oven is probably better than if it's had a lot of rising time, and then it's good for it to go into a very hot oven. But I think that people can agree to disagree on those points. I think those are relatively fine points in terms of the whole baking challah experience.
Okay. And I'd say that what comes next are many, many comments of thanking you for a really great lesson and wonderful appreciation for the demonstration and for a superb class. So thank you very much, Susan. It's been terrific.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jerry, for all the work that he did to get it all set up and to set me up for success. And thanks to the Jewish Study Center and to all the participants for making it possible. Thank you very much.